What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you with part 3 of our What Makes a League Winner series. Today, we're talking about quarterbacks. So we're talking about who are the potential league-winning quarterbacks in 2021 fantasy football and how can we spot them. With the other positions, I called this more of an early round guide because we were only looking at the early ADP of players. But with the quarterback position, this is pretty much a comprehensive guide to attacking QBs in fantasy this season, whether you play in Superflex or one quarterback redraft leagues. This will give you basically who to target, when to target them, and how you want to go about drafting quarterbacks in fantasy this year. What we want to know is who has the ceiling, who doesn't, who has too much risk, who's more of a safer pick. This exercise is basically going to outline anything from boom or bust options, as well as guys that might just have low ceilings and that you don't want to draft. The most important thing that you can garner from this video, as well as all the other league-winning videos that I made, running backs and wide receivers, is that you need to weigh all factors when you're evaluating these players. You need to weigh volume, talent, and situation. You can't just look at how much pass volume they're going to have or how talented of a quarterback they are. You need to weigh it all. And the more boxes a player can check, the higher the ceiling, the higher the floor, and the higher the chances of them winning you a fantasy championship. As you guys know, we are on the road to 5K. We are hoping to get there by August 1st, and we'd really appreciate your help in doing so. So if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button, like the video while you're down there, and leave any of your thoughts below. We're going to hit the intro, and then we're going to get right into this. So just like we did for running backs and wide receivers, we want to know who we're talking about, right? What did it take for those difference-making quarterbacks? And the QB1s that we're looking for are the every week starters, right? The set it and forget it dudes that even in one quarterback leagues were a huge advantage to have manning your QB1 slot in your fantasy lineup that season. So I went back from 2020 to 2013, and I took the quarterbacks that averaged more than 20 plus PPR points per game. I guess PPR doesn't really matter for QBs, but with a minimum of 12 plus games played. And I'm talking 4-point per passing touchdown scoring. So not 6 points per passing touchdowns, if that's what you guys were looking for. The players that it yielded. And if you guys have seen the other two, you're a true OG, and you know that we're going to go over the volume-based factors first. So these are the guys, the 39 quarterbacks since 2013 that have scored 20 plus points per game. You can see that there was a lot this year that did it. There was a lot in 2019 that did it. And then we get kind of progressively lower as we go back. There were, like I said, there were 39 quarterbacks that did it in those 8 seasons. And you can see everything here. In case you missed the other 2 videos, the colors that you see on the screen right now are reflective of the averages among these elite 39 quarterbacks. So anything that it was in green there is above average, yellow would be about average, and red would be below average among these 39 elite quarterbacks. On the screen right now, you can see that 10 quarterbacks averaged over 20 fantasy points per game this past year, and that was the highest in the last 8 years. You can see in 2019 there were 7, 18 there were 7, so on and so forth. And the interesting thing that I found was that the QB9 and the QB10 this year were Ryan Tannehill and Tom Brady. Those guys would have been top 3 quarterbacks in any of those other years if they weren't in this season. And they actually would have been the QB1 overall in 2012 and 2017. So I know I've heard this piece of analysis before, and the reason I bring this up is because I'm sure you're as the offseason goes on, but I've heard people say Tom Brady needed a 40 passing touchdown season, and he still only finishes the QB10 in points per game because it looks like we clearly had an outlier year. And like I said, Tom Brady would have been a top 3 quarterback in 19, in 18, in 17, in 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. Like he would have literally been a top 3 quarterback in any one of those other years. We just happened to see a big spike in quarterback performance this year. So looking at the rest of these guys came in all shapes and sizes, right? We had rushing quarterback seasons like we got from Lamar Jackson in 2019 and 2020. And Josh Allen and Kyler Murray this past year. We had Cam in 2015 putting up gaudy rushing numbers that got them on this list. And then we also had some outrageous passing numbers, right? We had Peyton Manning in 2013 with his 55 touchdowns or whatever. Aaron Rodgers this past year had an awesome season. And we had Patrick Mahomes in 2020. He threw 50 touchdowns. So we can get it from both perspectives, right? I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the jargon surrounding the late round quarterback strategy, right? How there isn't much of a difference between QB5 and QB18, and that's why we wait on quarterbacks. But the reason that jargon and that rationale is talking about QB5 is because there usually is a couple quarterbacks every year that do make a difference. They are league winning type quarterbacks. And if you can find the exceptions to the rule, then you can spot these guys. And like I always say, here's the averages that I referenced in the previous section. To be one of those elite options, on average, you needed 35 pass attempts per game, 2.21 passing touchdowns per game, almost 4.5 rushing attempts per game, and 0.22 rushing touchdowns per game. And then on a 16-game pace, again, I know we're going to 17 games, but for simplicity's sake, on a 16-game pace, that was about 570 pass attempts, 35 passing touchdowns on the season, 70 rushing attempts on the season, and almost 4 rushing touchdowns on the season. So those were the average numbers of the elite quarterbacks that we were looking at. Obviously, this is going to be a mix between passing numbers and rushing numbers for how these guys got on this list. So if I were to look at strictly the rushing quarterbacks of the players who didn't have the passing upside, I'm sure those rushing totals would be higher than they are. And if I were to look at strictly the passing numbers for quarterbacks that were like Drew Brees or something like that, who had no rushing upside, I'm sure those passing numbers would be a lot higher as well. So now, not everybody achieved those volume-based factors, and they needed to make up for it in other areas. And that's kind of what I just referenced. But as I've mentioned before, chasing volume can get you into trouble sometimes. I know we always love volume, right? Volume is the biggest thing in fantasy football. It's the reason everybody talks about all these players all the time. I've been burned by chasing volume before. And last year at the quarterback position specifically, Gardner Minshew got me into trouble. And the reason he got me into trouble is because I thought the Jags would be down in games. Gardner Minshew was a half-decent quarterback. And I thought the volume would be there, right? I thought they'd throw the ball 35, 40 times a game because they'd be losing all the time. And I knew the situation wasn't good. I knew they weren't going to win a lot of games. I knew their offensive line wasn't that good. I thought their weapons were okay, but not great. I knew the situation wasn't good, and I still fell for it. So when we look at situational factors, they matter a lot. They can completely tank a volume is king situation, just like they can for running backs and wide receivers. So here were the situational factors that are, in my opinion, equally as important to the process as volume. And this can help determine a QB ceiling and floor. And again, we have the same 39 quarterbacks on the board right now, except we have different factors that we're looking at. And the metrics that I chose to look at for quarterbacks, again, I tinkered with a lot. I tinkered with game script, for example. I wasn't able to find anything concrete with that. How good was their defense? Again, didn't really prove to be very good, but none of them proved to be very predictive that weren't on this list. So the ones that I did choose, offensive rank and points per game, right? You need to be in a good offense to be an elite fantasy quarterback. And this is obviously important too, because the quarterback has a direct influence on how good the offense is. So I would expect this, generally speaking, to be high, because if you're a good quarterback and you're posting good numbers and good fantasy numbers, your offense is probably going to be pretty good because you're the quarterback. You have a huge influence on how good the offense is. And the next thing I wanted to look at was protection. Obviously, protection was important for wide receivers. It was definitely important for the success of quarterbacks as well. And then for wide receivers, I talked about their rank in QBR, their quarterbacks rank in QBR. The reason I use this for quarterbacks as well is because I think it's just a simple way to measure how efficient of a quarterback a player was relative to other quarterbacks that season. And the next two that I thought were very important, and these were more like my judgment call, deciding whether these were important or not. But I thought this really depicted how the coaching staffs really deployed these quarterbacks the years that they were really good at fantasy. So when you have a great quarterback who's playing super well, coaches tend to let them have free reign of the offense, right? They let them rip it deep. They let them throw the ball in the red zone. So I wanted to see if these quarterbacks were entrusted with a lot of attempts downfield and in rich scoring areas like the red zone. So I looked at deep ball attempts per game and red zone attempts per game because I also thought this would be, how you get a lot of your fantasy value, right? If you're a quarterback of a team that runs the ball heavily in the red zone, doesn't push the ball downfield, it's going to be really hard for you to achieve a fantasy ceiling, right? You would need to be a phenomenal rusher of the ball for that to happen. And we've seen that with Lamar Jackson, whose team doesn't really push the ball down the field, nor do they pass in the red zone, but he runs so much that it doesn't matter. So, but if there was a guy like Kirk Cousins, for example, whose team runs the ball in the red zone and doesn't push it downfield, it's going to be hard for him to finish as an elite QB1. And the last situational factor that I wanted to measure was a metric on Player Profiler called supporting cast efficiency. And what it basically is that it aggregates the production premium over expectation of all of a quarterback's weapons. So their wide receivers, their running backs, and tight ends. Basically, what we're looking for is how good were the weapons around you. That's basically what this metric measures. And the reason I wanted to measure this is because it ties directly with a concept and a mantra and a philosophy of mine when playing fantasy and when evaluating quarterbacks for fantasy. When you are not an elite thrower of the football, right? You're not Patrick Mahomes, you're not Aaron Rodgers, you're not, Deshaun Watson or anything like that. You are usually only as good as the weapons around you. And I wanted to measure to see if these guys in their elite fantasy seasons had great weapons around them. And that definitely proved to be the case when you look at the numbers. And finally, the last thing I wanted to know, and I actually decided this late, right before I was preparing the show sheet, but I wanted to know their ADP prior to the season that they had elite fantasy production. And were they going high in drafts? Were they going off the board as a top 5 quarterback, or were you able to get them in the 20th round? And you can find quarterbacks anywhere, and the late round quarterback strategy is still king. So I wanted to see if those elite ceiling guys were drafted only in the early rounds, or if we were able to get them late. And like I said, for running backs and wide receivers, deficiency in one area was usually made up for in other areas to get that elite threshold. With Kyler Murray this past year, you can see that the quarterback rating, the offensive output, the supporting cast wasn't exactly there. But the way that Kyler made up for it was with his ungodly 8 carries per game and 0.69 rushing touchdowns per game. And when you can see it in reverse as well. You could see Tom Brady in 2020, for example. He offers absolutely nothing as a runner. We know this about Tom Brady. He has a couple QB sneaks on the 1 yard line every year. That's like the extent of his rushing production. But his volume throwing the ball and the high value attempts that he had, you can see he was pretty much the highest number in terms of deep attempts this year and in terms of red zone attempts. That helped him overcome that lack of rushing, because as a thrower, you're getting the best valued opportunities that you can get. And that's the nice thing about Bruce Arians' offense, is that it allows you to do that. And much like with targets and with rushing volume, fantasy players and analysts will often just look at projected passing volume and game script and assume it'll directly correlate to fantasy points, right? The biggest example I can see of this year is Joe Burrow, right? We all know that the Bengals are going to be down in games and that they threw the ball a lot. Well, are we looking at Joe Burrow's situation for what it is? Are we just projecting it as a good fantasy situation? Because there's going to be a lot of throwing volume, right? And I always talk about bad volume versus good volume. Bad volume is just that. It's just volume, nothing really else. Good volume is when, as a quarterback, you're well protected, you're throwing the ball a lot, you're a good quarterback to begin with, you have good supporting cast around you. That's what good volume is. Bad volume is just a quarterback throwing the ball because he has to, like Gardner Minshew last year, for example. So you can see the averages on the screen there. It all makes sense to me. You can see that offensive ranking points per game, top 6 offense on average, top 13 or so pass blocking line, top 7 ranking quarterback rating. But here's some context to those deep attempts, red zone attempts, and supporting cast efficiency numbers so that it makes it simple to understand. Because I mean, you guys could probably look at 4.56 deep attempts per game and be like, is that good? Like, how good is that? So how good it is 4.56 deep attempts per game would have ranked top 10 in the NFL in each of the last 2 seasons. So we're talking about a quarterback needed to push the ball downfield on average at a top 10 rate that year. And then as far as the red zone attempts are concerned, 5.23 red zone attempts was top 12 in each of the last 2 seasons. So they needed to be, in the top half or top third of the league throwing the ball in the red zone, and their quarterback needed to be the one distributing the ball in the red zone. And then supporting cast efficiency, we have 8.28 supporting cast efficiency, and that would have ranked top 10 in each of the last 2 seasons as well. So we're looking at a situation where you needed to push the ball downfield, throw the ball in the red zone, and you needed, on average, a top 10 supporting cast in the NFL in terms of their production premium. So those factors are all important, I think. And finally, when we look at the average ADP, the average ADP actually shocked me quite a bit. It's 8.56. And to provide more context, 28 of the 39 quarterbacks on this list were drafted inside of the top 12 of ADP prior to these monster seasons that they had. And I know everybody's against drafting quarterbacks early, but this might make me rethink that strategy a bit. And here's why, I'll tell you why in a second. I'm just going to go through the top 30 quarterbacks in ADP now, quickly 10 at a time, and explain my rationale for each one. So we're going to start with the top 10 quarterbacks. And I mean, you guys can expect that they're going to check the most boxes of all these quarterbacks because they're going in the top 10 from volume, from talent to situation to rushing production. These guys are the cream of the crop at the quarterback position. And the further down we get into this, the more question marks we're going to see. And I'm going to go through these guys one by one and just explain my rationale on each rating. So we have Patrick Mahomes to start, right? Patrick Mahomes is the cream of the crop at the quarterback position. The only box that he didn't check was rushing touchdowns. He's not a guy that scored a lot of rushing touchdowns in the past, and mainly because they throw the ball in the red zone so much. So Patrick Mahomes checked every box pretty much. Josh Allen, same thing. He actually checked every box. He didn't have a single box that he didn't check. And we know Josh Allen is elite at producing rushing touchdowns and elite in terms of rushing volume as well. And we all know his offense is going to be good, and his ranking QBR, he's a great quarterback, and red zone attempts were also very high last year as well. So he's a guy that Man, he's got all the chance in the world to repeat as a top 3 quarterback this year based on the factors that I looked at. Then we go on to Kyler Murray, right? Kyler Murray has more question marks to me. To me, I think Kyler Murray does not have 35 passing touchdown potential. And again, you might think that's, that might be incorrect, so you might disagree with that, but his passing output has not been very good. He's been primarily a rushing quarterback, and that's where his value has come for fantasy. And again, that's why his rush attempts and rushing touchdowns are green. And they might even need to be a higher level of green because his value as a runner is unparalleled only to Lamar Jackson in the NFL. So he can lack in these passing areas and still be an elite quarterback. We don't know how good the offense is going to be necessarily. We don't know how he's going to rank in quarterback rating, how efficient of a passer he's going to be. And we don't know, we do know they run the ball quite a bit in the red zone. And some of that is Kyler Murray, but they also don't give him any passing attempts in the red zone, which is actually what I was measuring. I wasn't measuring passing and running attempts. So Kyler Murray has a lot more question marks, but again, that rushing value that he provides can help offset those. And the same goes for Lamar Jackson, who's the next quarterback that we're going to talk about. No, he's absolutely not going to pass the ball 570 times in the season. As much as I think their passing volume is going to go up, I don't think they're going to throw the ball 35 times a game. It's just not realistic to expect the Ravens offense to take that big of a step forward in the passing game. And then when you can see his deep ball attempts, he doesn't generally push the ball downfield at a very high rate. Although I put a question mark there because that could change if they decide to, because they have Bateman now and because they have Wallace now and Marquise Brown is healthy, they should be able to push the ball downfield a little bit more than they've been doing it. But again, I don't know if he's going to get to that 4.56 attempts per game. And then red zone attempts, as I said, the Ravens don't pass the ball in the red zone. They run the ball in the red zone. So that number wasn't very high as well. And then here's the biggest one, right? Look at the green on Dak Prescott, man. Holy shit. He had no question marks, right? He runs the ball. He's going to have a lot of passing volume. He's going to be productive as a passer. We have his offense is going to be very good. We have the offensive line is going to be very good. We have his ranking quarterback rate. Like everything, supporting cast, everything looking at Dak Prescott points to he's going to be awesome for fantasy this year. And that shouldn't shock us, right? He was the QB1 or whatever in fantasy when he got injured. And as much as I think their passing volume isn't going to be quite as high as it was those first 5 games last year, it's still going to be very high, right? It'll still probably be top 5 in the NFL. Their defense still stinks. They have great passing weapons. They're going to be using their passing game to win games, and Dak Prescott's going to be a big part of that. And when I talked about good volume versus bad volume, this is good volume, right? Dak Prescott's volume is elite because he's an elite quarterback. He has elite weapons to throw to. He has elite protection. Good play caller. Like everything about Dak Prescott's situation points to elite fantasy season. So he's going to be a big time target of mine. We're going to get into Justin Herbert next. Justin Herbert also has some very good numbers as well. From a volume perspective, he pretty much checks every box, and he actually has a little ways to go as far as a runner of the ball. I think there's more meat left on the bone for that. The only question I really have about Justin Herbert is how good is his offense and how good is his offensive line? And I think I could have very easily put yes beside these because I think the offensive line upgrades that they made, right? They drafted a first-round left tackle. They brought in Corey Linsley, who was an all-pro center last year. And they brought in Matt Filer from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who also was a solid offensive lineman in his own right. So I think their offensive line could be very good. I didn't want to get a little, over aggressive and make it a yes right away because it takes time for those people to gel and stuff on the offensive line. But I do think Justin Herbert is in for a phenomenal year, and he's a great pick as well. Russell Wilson, a bit more question marks. He's never been a big rushing touchdown guy. Looking back at his career. So I put a no beside that. Pass attempts, we have no idea how much the Seahawks are going to throw the ball. I'd imagine they're probably not going to throw the ball that much because, Pete Carroll has fired like 7 coordinators now for running the ball not enough. And it seems like they want to take the cleaver out of Russ's hands permanently. They don't want to let him cook ever. So I don't know what to do with Russell Wilson from that perspective, but offensive line rank and pass blocking, right? Their offensive line's terrible. It's not very good. So I had to give him a no on that. Deep ball attempts per game. Again, he doesn't push the ball downfield as much as you would like to see for a guy who has Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf to throw to. And again, that's more of a function of the offense, not necessarily Russell Wilson. So we'll have to see what happens with that. We could very well get out to a situation where Pete Carroll does decide to put the chef's cleaver in Russ's hands and let him cook. But I don't see that as likely given the fact that they fired another coordinator for being too pass heavy. Aaron Rodgers, the next guy that we're going to get into. Other than rushing, he checks every box, and pass attempts too. He's going to be very efficient on his pass attempts, but they actually don't throw the ball very much in Green Bay. They ran the ball at a very high rate last year, and Aaron Rodgers still won the MVP. So it's not a big deal. Obviously, I didn't measure Aaron Rodgers' off the field situation here. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. I didn't have a metric for if they had an off the field situation coming into the season, but Aaron Rodgers is off the field situation. If it clears up, if he's a quarterback in Green Bay, he's going to be a phenomenal pick in fantasy. And then Tom Brady, man, Thomas Brady. Other than rushing, like I said, he checks every box in spades. He's going to throw the ball at a high rate. He's going to throw a lot of touchdowns. He has a great offense, great offensive line, going to push the ball downfield, going to rank highly in QBR, going to throw the ball in the red zone, great supporting cast. Like everything about Tom Brady screams draft me, right? Like I know this is my team and I'm a little bit biased, but even if they take a step back on an offensive perspective, we're still looking at a top 10 offense. Like they're not going to go below that, given the weapons that they have, given the play caller that they have, the continuity that they have, offensive line that they have. It's just impossible to me that Tom Brady is not a borderline top 10 quarterback in fantasy. Like to me, that's his floor, just based on the passing production that they're going to have in that offense. And then we get to our first question mark, right? Jalen Hurts. The rushing is there, right? I gave him green for rushing, assuming I give him the same grade for rushing as I gave for Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, right? So this is a guy that's going to run the ball quite a bit. It's going to be where his primary fantasy value comes from. But besides that, I don't really have a lot of faith in Jalen Hurts, right? We have pass attempts, probably not going to be that high. Passing touchdowns, there's no way he throws two touchdowns a game and gets to 35 passing touchdowns on the season. I just don't think he's a good enough passer to do that. Offensive rank and points per game. I don't think the Eagles are going to be a very good offense. As much as I like Devontae Smith, as much as I think Dallas Goedert's a solid tight end and Miles Sanders is okay, I guess, I still think this is going to be like a Chargers level offense next year where it's like 19th in points per game. And that's not really going to be good enough to support Jalen Hurts and all these guys being elite options. So offensive line rank and points per game, this has been a statistically good offensive line over the past couple of years, but they're getting older now. And they have a lot more question marks than they had before. So I gave him a question mark there. Deep ball attempts per game, red zone attempts per game, and supporting cast efficiency. These are all just question marks, right? Because we haven't seen Jalen Hurts start that many games, so we don't really know what his tendencies are. And their supporting cast is all like new players and young players that we're relying on. So I don't really want to just assume they're going to be great supporting cast. So I gave him a question mark there. They could be a great supporting cast. They could also not be a great supporting cast. And we could be looking at another Eagles situation a year from now. So for the next 10 quarterbacks we have here, we have Tannehill, Stafford, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Matt Ryan, Kirk Cousins, Tua Tagovailoa, Carson Wentz, and Baker Mayfield. And we could see a pretty sizable drop-off, especially after like Joe Burrow at 13. And that was kind of what I was referencing earlier, right? When we look at Ryan Tannehill, we could see he has a lot of elite traits for fantasy this year, but we know the red zone attempts are not going to be high because Derrick Henry runs the ball in the red zone. We know the rushing attempts are not quite there for Ryan Tannehill. He actually does produce a little bit of rushing touchdowns, and we have no idea how much the Tennessee Titans are going to throw the ball in general, right? We assume, I put a question mark there instead of an outright no, because when you look back at teams that add a dominant wide receiver to their team, generally speaking, they go up quite a bit in pass attempts. So we should be able to expect that the Titans are going to pass the ball more than they did last year. But even if they pass the ball more than they did last year, they were like a bottom 5 passing volume team, right? So if they go to league average, that's still like not quite what we want out of Ryan Tannehill, because I wish Ryan Tannehill threw the ball all the time. Because think about it logically. He's throwing to Julio Jones and AJ Brown with Derrick Henry in the backfield. He's going to be very efficient. Like, it's very hard for an opposing defense to stop an offense like that. And I think this offense could be one of the best in the league as well. So Ryan Tannehill, if you're the quarterback of one of the best offenses in the league, you are going to have an elite ceiling for fantasy. It's just how fantasy works. Even if your red zone attempts are being taken away by your running back, you're still going to be great from big play perspective, from an efficiency perspective, and your floor is going to be very high, because even when you have a bad matchup, your offense is so good that you could overcome bad matchups. And that's really what you want out of your quarterback, is that even in bad matchups, they perform. That's where you get the term every week starter, right? So Matthew Stafford, another guy that I really like this year. You could see the rushing attempts, obviously not going to be there for Matthew Stafford, but everything else checks out, right? The offense, how good it's going to be, how good the offensive line is, deep ball attempts per game, ranking QBR, supporting cast efficiency. And the only real question mark I have is red zone attempts, just because the Rams do run the ball quite a bit in the red zone. But Stafford, just a phenomenal pick this year. He's a guy that I think has a very high ceiling as well. Joe Burrow, again, we have a lot more question marks about him in terms of how many passing touchdowns he's going to throw, how much is he going to run the ball, but we know one thing for sure, right? He's going to throw the ball at a very, very high rate. He's going to push the ball downfield. He has, and unlike what I said for Gardner Minshew, he has a good supporting cast, right? He has Jamar Chase, and he has T. Higgins, and he has Tyler Boyd, and he has Joe Mixon in the backfield, and he has a couple tight ends that can contribute as well. The red zone attempts, again, the Bengals throw the ball in the red zone. I know everybody wants Joe Mixon to get all these rushing touchdowns, but the Bengals throw the ball in the red zone. So Joe Burrow, entrusted with a role that he's going to pass the ball a lot, pass the ball in the red zone, and push the ball downfield with a great supporting cast, probably going to lead to good things. The only thing that can hinder Joe Burrow, and let's think about this from a week over week perspective, he has a bad matchup. The reason he's going to underperform is because his offensive line gets beaten at the point of attack. That's the only way that Joe Burrow is going to have bad games in fantasy. So how good is that offensive line is really going to go a long way in determining Joe Burrow's ceiling. Because if that offensive line is league average, this guy could be a top 3 quarterback, like legitimately, like the volume he has, the efficiency he could have, he could be a top 3 quarterback. But if that offensive line is one of the worst in the league, which I think it is, then we're looking at a guy who's probably capped and is going to be more of a streamer, because in bad matchups, you don't want to be playing this guy against good defensive fronts. So to the next guy, we have Trevor Lawrence here. And much like Joe Burrow, he's going to have a lot of passing volume, right? The Jags are going to be down in games. The difference between Trevor Lawrence and Gardner Minshew is, one, I think the supporting cast is better this year than it was last year. 2, Trevor Lawrence is a far superior quarterback to anything that Gardner Minshew has ever been. And we still have those same question marks, though, right? The offensive line still isn't great. Offensive rank in points per game, I don't think this is going to be a great offense, even with Trevor Lawrence. Even we saw Justin Herbert last year only produced the 19th most points per game. And he won, offensive rookie of the year and broke the rookie touchdown record. So Trevor Lawrence could be phenomenal, and this offense still could struggle, right? Like, it's definitely still possible. And I think that's probably what's likely to happen. But the reason I like Trevor Lawrence here, and I mean, he's QB 14 in ADP, is because the unknown factor, the fact that he is a rookie, makes him intriguing. And the fact that we don't know how much he's going to throw the ball in the red zone, we don't know how much he's going to push the ball downfield. Those factors make it interesting for me, because he's a late round quarterback that I'm interested in targeting for that reason. And then speaking of rookies, we have Justin Fields up next. We know exactly what we're getting out of him. Pass attempts should be there. The Bears threw the ball quite a bit last year. Here's the real draw of Justin Fields, though. That green rushing ability is Jalen Hurts level. It is Lamar, and probably not Lamar Jackson level, but it is Josh Allen level at very minimum. And if Justin Fields is on the field, pun intended, he's gonna run the ball, right? Like that's what his value came from. He's a 4.4 athlete at the quarterback position. I compared him to Cam Newton. He can offer that kind of value as a runner of the football. We have big time question marks about his situation right now. At least I do. Offensive rank and points per game, I don't think the Bears offense can be very good unless Fields is like some phenomenal player. Offensive line is not good, right? It's kind of in shambles. They released their left tackle, replacing him with a rookie. It wasn't good last year. Supporting cast efficiency, I also don't think is very good. I think Allen Robinson went from underrated to overrated in one offseason. Like, he's a good receiver. Like, he's a top 15, 20 receiver in the NFL. But, I mean, he's not a top 5 receiver. He can't carry this offense himself. And Darnell Mooney is, an exciting young piece, but I'm not banking on him breaking out or anything. Like, this offense definitely could have a decent supporting cast, but outside of Robinson, Mooney, and maybe Montgomery, what are we really talking about here? Cole Kmet's like an interesting piece. I'm not as high on this offense as maybe some people are. So Justin Fields, his value, if he is valuable for fantasy, to me is going to come from rushing, not necessarily his situation. So Matt Ryan, again, a lot of question marks about him. When you lose Julio Jones, your passing touchdowns are down to take a hit. Your passing efficiency in general is down to take a hit. We know he's not going to run the ball very much, and his offense is in question, right? We don't know how good the offense is going to be now without Julio Jones. They weren't a very good offense last year with Julio Jones. I don't expect them to be a very good offense now. Offensive line isn't great. And then supporting cast efficiency, I put no there. Obviously, Ridley and Pitts themselves could be very efficient, but outside of Ridley and Pitts, I don't really know what else we're looking at, right? Mike Davis is okay. Other tertiary wide receivers are okay, but that one, I suppose I could make a question mark. I might have been a little harsh on the Falcons there, but it's still a situation that I'm not exactly excited about for Matt Ryan. Kirk Cousins, we know that his pass attempt volume is not going to be there, right? They don't throw the ball nearly enough in Minnesota for him to be an elite fantasy quarterback. Rushing attempts also not going to be there, but the situational factors are good, right? The supporting cast efficiency should be very high. Justin Jefferson's very good. Irv Smith should take a step forward. Adam Thielen, we know, is very good. And we know Dalvin Cook is going to be very good as well. So his supporting cast is very good. Red zone attempts, again, they run the ball in the red zone with Dalvin Cook. So we can't really bank on Kirk Cousins throwing the ball in the red zone. Ranking QBR, he's actually been very highly ranked in QBR over his entire career. So Kirk Cousins should be a very efficient quarterback again next year. Deep ball attempts per game, he doesn't necessarily push the ball downfield very high. And we don't know how good their offensive line is going to be, although they did add a left tackle in the first round of the draft. Tua Tagovailoa, the next guy that we're going to talk about here, he should have pretty decent volume, especially now coming from a running perspective. Now that he's, a year and a half removed from his hip injury, he should run the ball more. And he actually did run the ball a little bit last year. So I expect him to take an uptick in that category. The real question marks we get is how good the Dolphins offense is and how good these new pieces that they added gel together. Because if Jalen Waddle comes out and plays like he did at Alabama, and Will Fuller comes out and he plays like he did last year with Houston, we could be talking about a really good offense, right? Like if Devontae Parker's your wide receiver 3, like I think this offense could be really good. So Tua definitely has like the unknown factor, looking for that ceiling that you want to be chasing. But I mean, he does come with a lot of risk as well. And Carson Wentz is kind of a very similar situation. We know that the Colts are going to be a good situation from an offensive line perspective. We know that their offense is probably going to be pretty good. They were a top 15 offense last year with Phillip Rivers as their quarterback, so I can't imagine they're going to be any worse with Carson Wentz. Deep ball attempts per game, they actually push the ball downfield quite a bit. The real question we have with this situation is how good is Carson Wentz, right? Is he going to go back to his Philly days when Frank Reich was there and be an efficient quarterback, or is he going to stink the way he has the last 2 years? And then we also kind of have questions about the supporting cast efficiency, right? We're relying on Michael Pittman and Paris Campbell and things of that nature. The only real weapon that we know for sure is good in that offense is Jonathan Taylor, right? We don't really know for sure if these receivers and some of these other pieces are going to fit well with Carson Wentz. And they definitely could add to that offense still. They could add Zach Ertz or something like that if they wanted to trade for him, but we'll see what happens. Baker Mayfield, a lot like Kirk Cousins, the situation's good, but the volume will not be there. So Baker Mayfield, to me, after I was really excited about Baker Mayfield, but after doing this exercise, I might be a little bit more down on him than I was before. And this last group of 10 quarterbacks, I will just rip through these really fast because these guys don't matter as much. Obviously, Deshaun Watson's a clear outlier here because he would not be going there if it wasn't for his legal situation. And if Deshaun Watson, his legal situation clears up and he's the quarterback of the Texans or whoever else he's going to be the quarterback of next year, Deshaun Watson vaults into my top 8, right? He's going to go back into the elite territory because he has every chance to finish as the QB1 as a guy like Josh Allen, as a guy like Kyler Murray. He's right in that tier with those guys. So Deshaun Watson's only down here right now because of the off the field concerns that we have with him. When you get through these quarterbacks, the guys that I'm very interested in, you can see start at the beginning of this top, these 10 quarterbacks that we have here. Trey Lance, again, much like Justin Fields, his value is going to come from rushing. We don't really know how much they're going to throw the ball in San Francisco. We don't really know how good the offense is going to be, although I imagine it's going to be pretty good. So if Trey Lance is on the field, he's going to be a guy that's going to be valuable for fantasy because his offensive line's so good. And the fact that he can run the ball and his supporting cast is so good that they should be able to propel him into elite fantasy status if he's a good quarterback in real life. So Ryan Fitzpatrick, the next guy that we're going to talk about, again, he should be like a good passer next year. He's got good weapons. He's got a good offensive line, a better situation really than he's had in the last 2 years in Miami. And he's been valuable in Miami when he's been the quarterback. So I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is in for a big time year relative to his standards. And maybe he only finishes as like the QB 12, QB 11, QB 10 in points per game, but he definitely is a great target for a late round quarterback type of strategy because I think he's very safe and I think he's going to be really good. And then Zach Wilson, again, these rookie QBs have a lot of question marks because they're rookie QBs, but they're all in pretty decent situations. All of them have like half decent supporting casts. Zach Wilson should throw the ball quite a bit, and we know he can provide some value with his legs as well, not quite to the extent that Trey Lance or Justin Fields can, but I think Zach Wilson's going to be a plus rusher in the NFL, much like a guy like Joe Burrow. So Zach Wilson, another guy that I'm going to probably be targeting late in drafts. And then these last guys are more so fodder for me. Jameis Winston, we don't exactly know what we're getting out of Jameis Winston because we know what he was in Tampa, but I don't think we're going to see the same player in New Orleans. They don't run the offense the same way. So I think we're going to see a somewhat handicapped Jameis Winston. But again, he has a pretty good supporting cast, good offensive line. It should be a decent offense. So if he is the starter, then he's going to be a guy that I'm probably going to own as a late round quarterback in some leagues. Daniel Jones, offense is improved, but Daniel Jones, I'm not sure is a good quarterback. So he's a guy, if I'm wrong on Daniel Jones, I'll take the bullet. I just don't think he's very good. So I'm not going to invest in him too high. And that's kind of where it reflected in this evaluation. Ben Roethlisberger, Derek Carr, Sam Darnold, and Jared Goff, all to me are just low ceiling options. Sam Darnold, I guess, has a high ceiling, but from what I've seen in New York, we can't just throw that out, right? Like I know it was Adam Gase, and we want to just throw it out and say Sam Darnold could resurrect his career. But Ryan Tannehill showed more in Miami than Sam Darnold has ever showed in New York. So that ability, that the next Ryan Tannehill that Sam Darnold has been, classified as, I haven't seen that ability out of Sam Darnold. So I'm just going to err on the side of caution. I own him a little bit. Like I have him in a dynasty league and I'm excited about him from that perspective, but he's not a guy I'm going to heavily invest in because I do think it's a shot in the dark that it works out. I don't think it's likely that he's an elite fantasy quarterback. And even if I think it's more likely that he's like a middling fantasy quarterback next year. And we really don't know what we're getting out of Sam Darnold. And then Carolina's got to make a tough decision if they want to draft a quarterback next year, go after Deshaun Watson, or stick with Sam Darnold. And I think they're probably going to move on if he's just a middling quarterback. So here it is, the final culmination that led to the scores that I gave these guys. And a quick refresher for those of you that might have missed the wide receiver and running backs video. The way I quantified these things was anything that a player ranked in green was worth 8 points. Anything that a player ranked in yellow was 5 points. A question mark or an orange was -2 points. And then a no or red was -5 points. So the good should outweigh the bad if they had a lot of good. And those ceiling scores that you can see at the bottom there is basically what I'm referring to. So anything that was above 25, I consider to be like green, really good. Anything that was, 10 to 25 would have been yellow. And then anything kind of -10 to +10 would have been a little boomer bust. Anything in red was just like deep into the negatives and probably not going to be a target of mine. So here's some takeaways from this results. And again, these results are totally biased, right? I know somebody commented on the running back one and they were like, oh, these results are biased. I'm like, yeah, no shit. I'm the one who did this exercise. So my opinion of this situation is going to heavily skew these results. But I think I did a good job of explaining my opinion and using historical trends and things of that nature. So if you disagree, I'm happy to talk about it in the comments. But that's what I came to as a conclusion. So here are the takeaways from from these results and how I'm going to be attacking the quarterback position. And this is really where the value of this video is going to come in, right? Green guys are the targets for me in drafts, right? These are the dudes that I believe have lower risk and high reward to potentially become one of those elite options in your fantasy lineup. Obviously, with Watson and Aaron Rodgers, there's off the field risks, but for the purposes of this, I just assume that we're playing with those respective teams. The off the field risks have disappeared by this point in the offseason, right? Obviously, that's not really the case, so you got to avoid those guys based on your own risk tolerance, but if they play, they're going to be good. Yellow targets are guys that are good, but they have some risk. Guys like Kyler Murray, for example. You got guys like Russell Wilson. You have Joe Burrow, Ryan Tannehill. So these guys have some risks, but for the most part, they're going to be targets of mine as well. Orange could either be boom or bust guys. Like I said, Jalen Hurts, for example, is going to be a boom or bust guy, or just safe guys with maybe not that high of a ceiling, like Kirk Cousins, for example. And then guys in red are guys that I'm just not going to be drafting probably. Guys with low ceilings like Baker Mayfield or Matty Ice, or guys that I'm just not convinced are worth drafting at all, like Daniel Jones, Derek Carr, Big Ben. I'm just not even going to really want to waste a draft pick on guys like that. So here's where the real value comes from this video, right? I'm employing one of two strategies this year. Based on this exercise, based on all the underdog mocks and stuff I've done so far, this is where I see the best way you can attack quarterbacks in fantasy this year. Do you see all that green in the top 12, right? Do you see what I see? I see a shit ton of targets in that top 12 quarterbacks in ADP. That is my biggest takeaway from this exercise. I don't think that late round quarterback this year is going to be as effective as it has been in the past. I feel super comfortable projecting these top dudes, right? The Kyler Murrays, the Lamar Jacksons, the Patrick Mahomes, the Josh Allens, even the Tom Brady's, the Matthew Staffords. Like I feel super comfortable projecting these guys, knowing exactly what I'm getting more than ever, really, in fantasy. And I've been playing fantasy a long time. I know these early quarterbacks are usually not the direction you want to go, but the second tier guys specifically behind Patrick Mahomes, if you count him in his own tier, like Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, those guys have an opportunity cost that I actually think is very worth taking, right? Like we always talk about, a big rationale for the late round quarterback strategy is, well, do you really want to be taking Drew Brees when you're passing on, an elite running back or an elite wide receiver? To me, it's not a tough pill to swallow because it's not like I have to draft these quarterbacks and pass on Keenan Allen or J.K. Dobbins or Mike Evans or Michael Thomas or Amari Cooper in the third round. Like these quarterbacks are not going that early, right? Like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott. You guys can see these guys on the screen in Underdog ADP. These guys are going in the fifth round, right? They're fifth round picks. And does anybody seriously think, and some of these guys that are going ahead of them, does anybody seriously think that Myles Gaskin is going to help your team more than Dak Prescott? That Mike Davis is going to help your team more than Josh Allen? That Travis Etienne and a crowded Jags backfield that we have no idea what's going to happen is going to help your team more than Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray? Like, I don't think this is a big deal to pass on some of these guys for these quarterbacks. Normally it is, but this year I don't think it is. Same can be said for that fourth tier of quarterbacks, right? I think that the third tier of quarterbacks, the Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Hurts, and Russell Wilson, I think those guys are appropriately priced. But this tier, this fourth tier of quarterbacks with the more pocket passer types, with Brady and Tannehill and Stafford, these guys have a chance to be difference makers as well. And I'll pull you to the ADP again. Look at the ADP of where these guys are going with Joe Burrow as well. Do we really think that Jarvis Landry is going to be more valuable to our fantasy teams than Tom Brady is this year? Do we really think that Leonard Fournette is going to be more valuable than Ryan Tannehill, or that Michael Pittman Jr. is going to be more valuable than Matthew Stafford? Like, I know these guys, the reason you don't want to pick quarterbacks early is because it's harder for them to return value. But let me ask you this. If you're picking running backs and wide receivers here, how hard is it for those guys to return value? Like, pretty hard. Like, I would argue it is way easier for a guy like Matthew Stafford or Tom Brady to return value than it is for a guy like Leonard Fournette, Jarvis Landry, or Michael Pittman. Like, these guys are not elite options that you're passing on for these potentially elite quarterbacks. So when we're talking about ceiling, when we're talking about league winners, use them at all positions. It doesn't just apply to running backs and wide receivers. These quarterbacks, and I'm strictly talking about one quarterback leagues right now. This applies even more so to super flex leagues, right? That second and fourth tier of quarterbacks, I believe, are undervalued in super flex leagues as well. And if you don't want to take quarterbacks early, right, you still subscribe to the late round quarterback. You want to load up on running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends in the first 10, 11, 12 rounds of your drafts. My second strategy is to take that late round quarterback, right? The late round quarterbacks that I like this year are Kirk Cousins, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Jameis Winston, and Tua Tagovailoa and Carson Wentz, right? Like, I like those guys this year as late round options, but I believe it is unlikely that those guys can return an elite ceiling. So to counteract that and to get that league winning upside, what I'm also going to do is take one of these rookie quarterbacks as well. So in my draft, let's say I'm in round 13, haven't taken a quarterback yet. I'll take a Ryan Fitzpatrick in round 13. And then in round 14, I'll take a guy like Justin Fields, or I'll take Trey Lance, or I'll take Zach Wilson, or someone like that. And I can pair them with my veteran quarterback who can get me by until my rookie quarterback is ready to take that next step and be an every week starter in fantasy. And with those guys, those rookie quarterbacks, they have that rushing ceiling that's going to raise their floor from a fantasy perspective. So if Trey Lance doesn't get on the field until week 5, right? Like he doesn't start a game until week 5, I can use Ryan Fitzpatrick until then. And Trey Lance can be my rushing quarterback that can provide me that elite ceiling that I won't get out of Ryan Fitzpatrick, to be quite frank. Employing a strategy like that is because I don't see any late round quarterbacks this year that can prove to be elite options, right? We saw in 2019, we saw guys like Dak Prescott going in like round 8, like quarterback 18 overall. Like, we don't have guys that have that elite ceiling going that late in drafts. It seems like we're getting smarter with these ADPs and sharper. All the guys that have the elite ceiling are going high, right? And if I'm going to take one of those early options, I better be assured that he's going to return value. But I do think it's a safer bet this year than it ever has been because of the rushing volume that some of these high-end quarterbacks have. It's very hard for them to bust, right? Like, even if you took Lamar Jackson in your draft last year in the 3rd round, I mean, he still was fine. Like, he wasn't terrible. The reason was because he rushed for 1,000 yards, right? Like, he actually was quite bad from a passing perspective to start the season. But the reason he didn't completely flame out in your lineup is because he had that rushing value, right? If I'm going to take one of those late options, like I said, I'm going to pair him with a rookie quarterback. I'm going to take Fields. I'm going to take Lance. I'm going to take Trevor Lawrence. I'm going to take Zach Wilson because the rushing output that those rookies can provide should help give me a chance of that elite ceiling. So to recap this video, that strategy portion of the video, the tier 2 quarterbacks, the Dak Prescotts, the Josh Allens, I'm going to be targeting those guys at value. The tier 4 quarterbacks, the Matthew Staffords, Joe Burrows, Tom Brady's, and Ryan Tannehill's, I'm going to be targeting those guys at value. And then if I miss out on all those guys and say the value wasn't there, they're going earlier than I thought, a rookie at his ADP, let's say I take Trevor Lawrence in the 11th round and I swing back around and I take Carson Wentz in the 14th, or I take Ryan Fitzpatrick in the 13th, or Kirk Cousins in the 12th, or something like that. That's the strategies I'm going to be employing this year as ADP currently sits. Obviously, if we get to August and all these second tier quarterbacks are going in the 3rd round, I'm not going to be taking them then. It's currently right now where they're going in the 5th round where I'm going to be taking them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Once again, if you follow the logic of my brain in that video, please, hit the thumbs up button. I hope you've learned something from this. And if you've made it to this part of the video, guys, I want to sincerely ask you to smash that like button, because I'm not even kidding you when I say these 3 videos that I've put out, the running backs, wide receivers, and quarterbacks, have probably taken me 40 to 60 hours in terms of preparation to make these videos. So if you guys appreciated this, please like the video, comment any of your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new. It took a lot of effort to make these videos, so I really appreciate that. And if you guys are interested in more redraft content, our redraft draft guide will be dropping July 15th. You can go to thefantasystockage.com right now to pre-order it. And as of right now, you'll also have access to our Dynasty draft guide, which is currently live. Or you can simply deposit a $10 minimum deposit on Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE. Link will be in the description. And you will get a $25 bonus to play with on Underdog, which is a free entry into the Best Ball Mania 2 contest, which can potentially help you win $1 million. And you'll also get both of our draft guides for free. So if you guys do use our Underdog code, make sure you let us know, because we're currently working at a system with Underdog Fantasy right now to have them automatically tell us who uses our Underdog code. But if you want access to the draft guide right away, just let us know you used our Underdog code. We'll check with them, and then we'll give you the draft guide. So, peace out, guys, and enjoy your Monday.
Wire me the money.